Hello, my name is Creostix, and I often get asked what sort of horror games do I like, what do I enjoy, what do I recommend? And with that in mind, I figured I might as well do a top 25 listing of my favorite horror games. A couple of points before I begin, though. First off, I don't really like the kind of horror that is of the runaway, stealth, insta-kill variety, so there's not going to be a lot of those in here. So if you enjoy a horror game that sort of you identify as a member of that sort of horror, it's probably not going to be here, and I'm sorry about that. Um, the other thing is that I have never had a PlayStation beyond the second one, so if your favorite horror game is an exclusive to PlayStation 3 or 4, say Last of Us or Until Dawn, I haven't played those, so there we go. Uh, a couple of examples of the ones that didn't make the cut are, for example, things like Anna, or Anna Extended Edition, which I played somewhat, but I found it so impossible to solve the puzzles, so it's sort of like it's not too far from here, but it just doesn't make the cut. Uh, Forbidden Siren from PlayStation 2 also didn't make it because it was simply I played some of it, not enough to make a really full idea of, but it seemed so difficult to play. Just die. It's like it's cool ideas, but not quite. Um, I also wrestled with myself on should I just barely have Outlast in here, but it just didn't reach it because it is of the genre that doesn't really create as such like horror or fear in me, and more frustration and anger because BS stealth sections where you die, get frustrated, and it's like that's not horror. That doesn't scare me. Uh, and also, I did wonder if I should put Walking Dead Season 1, because it's such a really, really good game, the Telltale one, but it maybe just didn't quite have enough of the fear or dread in it to quite reach it. It was close, but not quite. Uh, I suppose Walking Dead Season 3, Telltale Walking Dead Season 3 is scary bad, but, haha. Um, but with that though, um, before I begin, also one tiny more thing. I My definition here may bend and twist a bit in that I have two caveats which need to be reached to be on this list. Which is one, it needs to have themes that have that are horror-y, as in say nightmares or monsters, zombies, serial killers, psychological horror stuff. That's what something that can be defined as a horror theme somehow. And the other uh, criteria is that I needed to feel, say, either fear or dread, or at least a little, or a, 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 a sort of an whimsical, strange reaction to seeing nightmarish stuff at the very, very least. So yeah. So with that though in mind, this might have a couple of games you might consider not truly horror games, but that's what's gonna happen. I mean, I've seen a number of lists where many people have put Dark Souls in there, and I'm like, I see where you're coming from, but to me, Dark Souls is the happy place action RPG game, so it's like, to each their own. But with that, number 25 is American McGee's Alice. Now that's a strange pick, I will grant you, but here's where I'm coming from with that. I believe it was in like 99-ish when it came out, and the overall idea was, back then and to still is, inspiring. A gothic twisted sort of a nightmare take on Alice in Wonderland, a dive in the psychosis of Alice, who has apparently lost her family in fire or something, and you go into the twisted Wonderland to see what, whoa. And I distinctly remember there's these just striking visual level design styles, where one spot was where you're in this floating level where the entire 3D sort of a backdrop was this graphical moving image of that platform being constantly over and over again on a cycle sucked into some sort of a clock tower or a clock with a door, and over and over. It was like, back then that looked striking, and I still remember it with fondness and just whoa. And this game is likely the least scary of this entire list, but it did create just enough dread in me in its just themes and visuals that it gets there. The reason why it's also not higher than this is it has some issues in how it has aged, in that a couple of the level designs may be a touch more archaic or confusing in either like where do I jump or such. So they're more like video gamey levels, a couple of them. But still, I did play through this when Alice Madness Returns came out, and it actually was pretty close between these two. I wrestled that point a lot, but in the end, it just came down to, I feel that Madness Returns had a little bit more of repetitive combat against the same kind of enemies, and it felt like every single level theme dragged on just about one horizon too long, in that, okay, now we've been in this mushroom place with this backdrop for 3 pretty large levels, and then there's one more, and like, come on. But mind you, they're both really good games, in my opinion, and I recommend both of those. Also, I forgot to almost mention, this 25 list is a case where there's only one game per franchise, so that's gonna make things even harder for me, okay? Next up, number 24. Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper. I know. Again, you're wondering, that's a strange pick for a horror game. Bear with me, because for me, this created more dread than, again, most of the runaway stealth insta-kill horror thingies like the Slendermans and Outlast 2s and such. Why? For one, I am a fan of the Sherlock Holmes games to begin with, and Sherlock Holmes as a concept as well. This had some really unexpected strengths in how atmospheric it is. Just imagine the concept of you just walking and inspecting around the murder alleyways and streets of Whitechapel during the Jack the Ripper cases, and just seeing the bodies and inspecting those, but just breathing in the dark streets of horror and death in, the late 1800s. It was surprisingly it reached down to my soul, like, ooh, that is dread. That feeling is a lot of dread, and it felt really surprisingly cool. And there's a number of these moments where the music design is interesting or effective, in that when you solve something involving the Ripper, case, the locations or whatever, you solve something and then you just get this musical cue that just hits into your neck like a dagger, like you feel like you're just in it. It's hard to put into words beyond that. It feels like you're breathing the atmosphere of those serial murders, and it feels amazingly and surprisingly just scary, and the feel of dread is real. At least for me. It has a couple of technical shortcomings in how the character animations and such work, so it does need a little tiny bit of suspension of disbelief, in that, well, that is a bit of a simple animation of character, but still. And a second point is, you obviously have to enjoy solving puzzles pretty much. Like, that's a lot. I don't remember them being impossibly difficult, but there's a couple of pretty nasty ones, and it's, a puzzle game at heart. You explore, solve puzzles, do logic puzzles and all that. So that's the game itself. So keep that in mind, of course. So if that's not your jam, then you're probably not going to have as good a time as I did. But that's just, again, strange pick, I know, but that's why we're here, I suppose. Number 23 is Little Nightmares. You might be wondering, I saw you Let's Play that game, and it seemed like you didn't really enjoy yourself that much. How is it, on the top list here? Well, it's true that I had a number of frustration moments with that game, and that is, it has issues in both its controls for me and puzzle logic, and the perspective is very disorienting in that it's easy to miss a hanging rope in a jump, you see. So you don't know if you're gonna pass the rope from the front or the back, or you just hit the rope to climb it, and you need to go back and do a whole thing over again to reach that. That does happen, and you need to keep that in mind. However, the visual style of this game and the just aesthetic approach is one of the strongest I've seen in a very, very, very long time. Everything looks like they're this combination of melting wax and fat and disgustingness, and they're all massive. Like you're this yellow raincoat child thing in a world where you're just about to the ankle of everyone else, of these strange and just slob-like humans who look more like wax tumors than people sometimes. It looks amazing. You need to be prepared for a little bit of possible frustration and, I need to do that. Oh, come on, and come on, just grab that thing and go forward. But when it clicks strong. And there's not a lot of, well, there are a couple of good 2D or 2.5D platforming horror games, but this is one of the good ones in the end. I had a frustrating time with it sometimes, but when you really break it down, especially with the beginning and the end, I felt really good playing it, and just, that is some horror. But indeed, because of the shortcomings, it can't get any higher than number 23. Number 22 is going to be an interesting one in how it's probably from the entire list the one that has the lowest review scores of any of these games, I think. I'm not sure, but I would imagine it's pretty close up there. So again, this is an excellent example of this being my extremely subjective opinion. So, deep breath. Number 22 is Murdered Soul Suspect. And you're like, yeah, I know. I call it very underrated in that it sits, depending on the platform. I think at the time of me recording this, I think it sits at something like 51 to 59% on Metacritic. Yeah. So if you don't know what it is, it's essentially this sort of a story where you're a cop who dies at the beginning and becomes a ghost, and you now play as the ghost of the cop to solve your own murder, essentially, and solve some other stuff in the process. So what I liked about this is that it's a very story-focused kind of horror, which oftentimes speak to me, and I feel that the types of stories it tells, not necessarily even the main story, but all the other stuff around it, are a lot better than it gets any credit for. You're going around as this ghost, a ghost apparition detective, whatever, in Salem, essentially, and you're sort of breathing in this twilight world of black and blue and white. And the biggest thing that I remember really enjoying this is that they're different buildings. have these sort of side quest collectible things, which sound a little weird to like how's that good? But I remember that every single place has this sort of a side horror story of its own. You collect these pieces of the story, which I don't remember exactly how many of them, maybe 6 or 10 or whatever, and you put that together and the game gives you the story. The story itself may not at all, probably, relate to your story, your main story, but it is a horror story of something that happened in that building. And they're all pretty goddamn chilling. Like, they tell these tales of how corpses turn up in the disgustingness of ways, and how a prisoner somewhere suffered through unspeakable things, and then some rather disturbing things happened, and all that stuff. That stuck with me. I still remember fondly every single thing of those side quest stories. And on top of this, the game has this thing where pretty much it has a lot of different types of collectibles, but every single one of them gives a little bit of backstory to build together the main lore as well. The minuses, I'm sure you have heard, is that it has these weird combat mechanics scenarios where you need to sneak around some red floating ghosts and go behind them and press X to make them go away or die, and it's like, it's needless. It doesn't need to be there. I agree, but they're not difficult at all. They were so easy that I just got them over with and then focused on the story bits and collectibles and side stories and all that all over again. And it was just, I enjoyed just strolling through and experiencing a number of different stories. Surprisingly enough, I think maybe the main story is the weakest of them all, but especially the side stories were so good that I still remember the entire game fondly, and I like it. I have some notes here and trying to remember have I forgotten to mention anything else about that. I think that's more or less what I have on Murdered Soul Suspect, though. That's just everyone else hates it, but I like it. I don't know what else to tell you. And also, it cannot be very expensive to get now. It's probably costs like the amount of a burger or something. And it's not super long either. I think it's like 6 to 8 hours at most, so you're not gonna have to go around endlessly just slaving away at corridors or whatever. It's a pretty concise experience and not expensive either. If you haven't tried it and you've just it has a bad review score, maybe give it a go. You might be surprised. Just adjust your expectation into just, you gotta sometimes just go behind a ghost and give it a wedgie. Sure, whatever. And then, number 21 is a game called Get Even. I think it came out in 2017 I think it's a Namco thing or something, and it was an interesting one. I hear it was in development for a really long time, and essentially Get Even is one of those games that is a mixed experience in it does some things really well and some things rather poorly. But when it does horror well, which is when most of the game is of the horror that it does pretty well, even very well, it really, really hits it. It has this I forget from where the developers were exactly, but it has this distinct Eastern European feel, which you need to almost be East European to do it, maybe, but so how everything is both scary and depressing at the same time in a really good way. I call it the Slavic melancholy, even though they might not be exactly Slavic in where they're from, but that's the term I've sort of, I don't know where I heard it from, but it just fits what I'm imagining in an Eastern European game. I don't want to spoil the details of how exactly it approaches its story and all that, but just suffice to say that it is a really, really a breath of fresh air, let's say, into the horror genre, and it's by the very least something different and interesting and scary. Just pointing out it's scary. And on top of the story, they again trying to avoid the spoiling details, but the method they try to tackle the story, the themes they go for, the how they go for what they're trying to do essentially, is both in how it's told and when it's trying to be is very unique. So again, even if it has issues, it's so not like many other things that you should probably give it a go at some point just because of that and see what you think. However, I can give some reasons why it is mixed and that aren't really spoilers, in that it has a number of, don't worry, just bear with me, some misguided stealth sections that give you this really cool gun that allows you to look around corners, but if you use the gun to kill the enemies you encounter, the game doesn't like it, and you get the bad ending, essentially. That's which is like, but you gave me this cool gun to use. Why would that, that's weird. But and even worse, I know, but this needs to be addressed. Even a bit worse, the stealth itself is borderline impossible because the mechanics aren't really there to allow you to effectively stealth your way through the sections it gives you. But don't worry, you don't have to stealth them. You don't have to. You can just take the gun, shoot every enemy you encounter in those 3 or 4 stealth sections, and just take the bad ending. It's fine. What you need to do there is just do exactly that. To just, shoot your way through the sections and enjoy the horror and the story just beyond that, which is the meat and the potatoes of the entire thing. Again, there's like 3 or 4-ish of those rather confusing, like, why is this section a thing? But it's okay, just grab a gun, boom, 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 go forward. Like, okay, fine. Even when you get the quote-unquote bad ending, it's not that different from the quote-unquote good ending anyway, and it doesn't really take away from the journey of what you're piecing together and what the story, the stake of the game actually is. And it's, boy, I remember a number of just inspired horror sections of that game, which just, they still haunt me just a little tiny bit. It's when it goes scary, it really goes there. It has some like, it's like ups and downs, but it's so unique kind. It's such a unique set of ups and downs, and mostly really ups, to be honest. It's so you should probably just, if you have the time and such, just give it a go. I'll recommend that. But yeah, by the very least, I can promise you it will be interesting. And I have Let's Played it too, if you want to see it. It's on the channel, but yeah. I'm gonna cut this list off here and continue with the next 5 next time, because obviously I tend to ramble on a bit when it comes to reasons why games are good or better than others and so on and so forth. But if you feel like you disagree on some points about the games I have mentioned, do let me know. I'm listening. And I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have indeed, please do drop a like or a comment or even subscribe or share if you want to. It would really, really help. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.